Hello and welcome to Movie Phone. I always want to say that.
Hello and
Hello.
welcome to Movie Phone.
Hi there.
If you'd
Welcome.
like a list of movies, hit 1.
Welcome back to Lawfully Chaotic, Season 2, Episode 14. Thank you for joining us.
Whoa.
I am Brian Weiss of RPG&Co. As always, with
Crazy.
me are my fabulous co-hosts, Sharon, the fantastical Barry Bot,
Hello, Internet.
and Jason, the storyteller of TTRPG Academy.
Hello, peeps.
Thank you all for joining us in chat tonight. Thank you all for those of you who are watching afterwards in VOD. We always appreciate the conversation and support. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to be a DM. Sharon is going to interview the two of us on how to be a DM. But before that, do we have any announcements? I will just say that once again, I am glad that I extended the intro reel because I almost forgot to hit the go live button again. 15 seconds in, I'm like,
Big red button.
yeah, the big giant
red, shiny button.
right? Yeah. So what do we got announcement wise? Sharon, what do you got for us?
Ooh, I actually don't really have anything on hand at the moment, although I am working behind the scenes of creating my own channel. I'm not sure if it's going to be, I think it will probably be sometime next month. We'll keep an eye out for all things on BarryBot over on Instagram for more updates, so stay tuned for that. And
Awesome. That's big news.
yeah, so I'm
Sweet.
pretty excited.
Awesome.
Jason?
Sorry, I was reading
I
something.
know your son.
I'm getting DM'd like crazy. So I'm working on volume 1 through 10. I've wrapped up almost half of the volumes of the Fantasy Compendium series. And then, then going to work on the Alchemist Compendium series, which breaks down all the different things that you can harvest from creatures within fantasy worlds. I'm also working on our new campaign that we've been meeting on Sundays to discuss and organize for that to start. Hopefully by the first week of June is our tentative plan for that one. So I'll get that posted out to the D&D club, which I think by June is going to be the RPG club officially on Meetup. I know he's made the change on Instagram. He's made the change on his Discord handle for the Pro DM group. So I think that's probably going to be his major change come June. He's also going to be introducing our new website that we'll be able to be a part of, where all the Pro DMs will have their own website we all collectively run our games through and help our players find each other and find us. So yeah, I think June is going to be a big month. I'm really hoping it's it's gonna be fun. I'm already at 10 games and I'm adding an 11th game first week of June. I've got a 12th game pending that hasn't filled up yet because May is a notoriously slow month for the network system because school's wrapping up. People are getting ready to go on vacation, graduations. May is incredibly slow for the network. So June is usually when it picks up. People want to start running a summer series. So my summer series this year is going to be Waterdeep.
Cool.
It's going to be a Waterdeep summer series that I'm going to run sometime mid-June, maybe. I don't know yet. I'm still recalibrating all my old notes and going through that. But it's going to be a busy summer.
Sounds like
busy
it.
summer.
Sounds
How about
like
you,
it.
Brian? What do you got?
How's that cloning project going? You almost got your
no matter how many I clone, the next copy is always worse than the original. So
Waterdeep, you say?
Waterdeep, you say.
Brian, what's going on with you?
What is going on with me? I think I'm finally back up to speed after COVID and vacation and then cold on top of COVID and all that bullshit.
The cold on top of COVID?
Yeah. It was
Jeepers.
fun.
Sorry, Brian.
And I have, I have been really remiss in my posts and whatnot. And I know life happens, but it's really been bugging me. So I have been working on kind of organizing and whatnot, and hope to be back in full swing with both content creation and posts and all that jazz very, very soon, like within the next couple of weeks. So yeah, stay tuned.
One really exciting thing yesterday, Tailspire dropped their ship content. You can now build ships
very cool
in Tailspire. So
That's
it's really fun because the Friday group is a pure pirate group. So I missed that. What'd you say, Sharon?
I said that's a lot of ship.
It is a lot of ship.
I thought you said that's a load of ship.
I see what you did there.
All right, enough of this ship. Let's get going.
I got a cargo full of it.
Okay,
it's all in the rear hold.
Oh my God, that only took 7 minutes. Where's chat? Oh, there it's chat. Thank you. It's 3 miles. Thank you for joining us. I was just I was just wondering where the hell was chat. Once again, you win. We're gonna have to come up with an actual like award, like monthly award for like first into chat and most into chat and all that stuff. Anyway, Sharon, what are we talking about tonight?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Lawfully Chaotic. Tonight, we will be interviewing these two crazy folks here about what it is to be a GM and how to run a game, and possibly, maybe, sort of, kind of, I might run my own game? Question mark?
Dun, dun,
It depends how well these guys will answer their questions tonight as we take a deep dive. So, gentlemen, to start off, I called you gentlemen, so doff your caps.
Yeah.
How do you begin to write for a campaign, to prepare for it?
Jason, would you like to take this, or would you like me to go first?
Oh, yes, you have to talk in a British accent. Yes.
I've changed a lot how I approach that recently over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think the influence of running a lot of games has kind of sent me down a unique pathway. When I first got started, I tended to pick up a module, right? And just kind of run with the original idea of the module and maybe make a lot of changes to it that made it more comfortable and easier to use. That way you're not feeling completely overwhelmed by the idea of preparation. I would also say one of my key preps is to just have the most constant kind of communication with the players, reaffirm with the players that's our table, get rid of that angst, get rid of that kind of concern of, our natural introverted tendencies with each other by just decomposing the table and getting folks to understand that communication is very important. Prepping for a campaign for me often starts with writing about 6 months worth of material in a couple days. And yeah, it's generally how I like to write. I like to write about 6 months worth of material. That way I don't ever feel like I'm going to run out. I don't ever want to feel like I'm pressured to kind of like pull something on my ass that I'm not ready to pull, and therefore ruin the experience for the players. Probably the most important part about a campaign prep is being realistic about your skills. Take a really good reflective look at all the things that make up you and understand what parts of you can use to bring to the table for the group, right? If you love anime, if you have, like unique creative skills that maybe not even, about 6 months. And then I add to it as I go along when I have time.
Yeah, but the question is, how detailed is your 6 months? Is that
it's all framework. It's all kind of like done in framework with a core lore.
A central.
Like I like to build a central lore with a lot of framework around it. That way I can run as many campaigns as I want against it and can feed the different campaigns off of the different lore or on the core of the lore material. And the lore material could be something as simplistic as a general theme, and then with that general theme kind of written out, and then your lore related to the theme written out. And you'll notice that I'm not really stipulating it has to be D&D or anything, right? The writing style that you generate should be one that you feel like you can, it can be very opaque to different things that you want to use it for. I think that's the most important. Like a lore plus an outline, but the outline method kind of starts feeling a little bit table of content heavy. So I prefer to write what I call a framework method. An outline gets too specific. A framework allows you to adapt things more creatively and not lock you in place to something that you feel like you have to put the players through. You know, like if your theme is a city about to be destroyed by a meteorite, right? Let's say that's your theme. You could then write lore behind the history of the city, how the threat came about, the social and political indications of the environment, right? You write this really fun lore that brings you to the kind of like antagonist, protagonist kind of relationship of the lore. And then you just use a framework system that says, okay, here's a list of NPCs. Here's the detail of the city. Here's the detail of the meteorite. Here's the detail of the bad kind of the bad actors involved in kind of like causing the fatalistic outcome and what makes them up. And that way, when you start a campaign, you can start. Yeah, exactly. Don't look up is exactly what I was referring to. That way, when you start a campaign, if your framework has enough content in it, you could just pull from the framework and then do an hour's worth of writing and probably be able to, manage 2, 3, or even four sessions. I'd say my final piece of advice is let the players role play. For campaign development, it's a continuous process. So as you're watching your players role play, take notes as a storyteller or a GM or a DM. Just take notes of what they're doing. Go look at those notes afterwards and go, oh man, they just created 20 pages of content for me off their own inspiration.
You're saying to people watch and then take notes.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. It works.
That's why I run all my games at the airport.
I know what game you run at the airport, buddy. I know what game.
So Brian, what about you? How do you create a game?
A lot of what Jason said, I do also. I think most importantly, the points that he stated is that as a DM, pick something that interests you. Because I have found that, if you do a good job DMing and, whether it's a published module or campaign or adventure or homebrew, if you do a good job and you're a good storyteller, then your players more likely than not will enjoy themselves and have a good time. As a DM, it can get very tedious to run a campaign that you're not invested in. Like I probably will never run Tyranny of Dragons again because I don't like it. I've been running it for 2 years and I kind of can't wait till it's done. So yeah, I would say again, the most important thing is to pick something that you have passion about, that you're interested in, and that you can invest yourself in, whether it be, and you could pull inspiration from anything. It could be another adventure. I pull a lot of content from published stuff too, and then modify it. And I think also over the months and years, I tend to be skewing back towards full world building. I know Malcolm Trotter, Gentleman Game Master, pulls heavily from cinema. He is a huge cinema buff, so he pulls inspiration from movies and TV. Pick something that interests you, and it's much easier. I find it's much easier to write that way. Now, I've also said in the past that I am not one to sit down and write a whole campaign out. Like Jason, I do a framework. It's not an outline. It's not, scenario 1 or chapter 1, yada, yada, yada. It is a framework. And the way I write is generally, here's the feel that I want. Here's what I want this to feel like. Like I have a vague,
Interesting.
just as an example, like I have a vague Stranger Things meets Goonies meets whatever Alien. Okay. Feeling. So I want it to feel like that. I want it to have that kind of impact on the players. That'll be the background for the story. And then I generally picture the beginning couple of chapters, maybe through like, just for lack of a better descriptive term, maybe through like level 3 or 4, let's say, in as it relates to D&D. But that's not a hard and fast rule. That's just a reference point. And then I have where I want it to end up and where I want the last chapters to look like. Everything in between, I kind of write as I go. I will write content for locations that I feel I'm going to need, for NPCs that I feel I'm going to need. If there are specific types of encounters that I definitely want to support that overall feel, then yeah, basically it's kind of like Rails a little bit, and then completely off the rails, and then back on track at the end is the best way to describe it. So
Right.
if there are encounters that I know that I want that are going to support that feel, I will write those encounters and either know where they're going to slot in or kind of have them off to the side. I developed a whole campaign arc off of, and I've said this before, off of a side quest that one of my groups played one night because we just needed a break from the main storyline.
Right.
So, pursuant to what Jason said about watching your players and watch how they role play and what they like, and as a group, what they like to do, and use that as subtle cues in your storytelling, I find that it can be just really, really amazing to watch this story that you have an idea of, but that is not fully fleshed out, become real.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty much how I approach it. There was one other thing that I was going to say that you mentioned, Jason, but it just flew out of my head.
I would say one other thing to consider for prepping that I probably should have mentioned before is taking consideration the skill set of the players, right? How many of them have played before? How many haven't played before? Get a real kind of bird's eye view of their skill set, and then equally set an expectation, right? Try to set an expectation of, hey, I'm probably going to fuck up a few times, but, because I'm learning alongside you guys. Like, I've said this many times before, the biggest challenge I have is I've played the game too long. And I have a hard time slipping into new players and new DM shoes because I don't really remember that feeling. I don't actually remember what that felt like because I was 9, that was years ago, so it was
I can still put myself into a new player's shoes, but that's a very good point. I find it very difficult to put myself into a new DM's shoes. Like that's completely foreign to me. I know what I was going to say. The other thing I was going to say about the free form is, now I don't write 6 months in advance, but I like to try to be like 2 to 3 sessions ahead writing wise.
Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, so whereas I'm letting the players' decisions help write the story, I also don't want to have all of a sudden have a lack of content, and we have a session one night where it's just like, oh, well, you guys didn't give me enough to write the next chapter.
I would always, like any muscle you should practice, try that from time to time. Just like take a look at your previous session's notes and do no other prep. It is a fascinating experiment, and it's interesting how much more challenged you feel as a narrator, right? As you realize, oh man, I got to use my adaptive muscle like today because I didn't do any prep. So what does that mean for the game? And that way it allows you to experience what the players might be experiencing because you feel unprepared.
Right.
And you can have a shared experience with the players by, oh, this is how they feel when I'm not prepared, or now they understand how I feel when they're not prepared. Like it's kind of like a shared emotion, an opportunity of empath.
I did not watch that.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
just going to say, and this it's definitely a skill that you need to practice, but being unprepared and not having content ready, in my mind, are two different things. Okay. If you don't have content ready, I don't necessarily liken that to being unprepared.
That's
That's the most important time to listen to your players' cues and just kind of, again, we've had, I'll never forget, we had a 2.5-hour shopping trip session one night, and that was it. And they loved it. They loved it. So, it's also some smoke and mirrors. Like, I'm not prepared, but I'm not going to let you see that.
Right. So when you introduce your campaign, do you collaborate the story with the players, or do you introduce your own concept and have them play along?
So I'll start with this one because my answer is pretty easy. Absolutely collaborate on the player backgrounds, what the characters' stories are, and get a feel for how those could work into the story. As far as collaborating on the campaign, no, I actually do not. Because I generally, even though it's very free form and I let the players help me write it as it happens, I want it to be, I like it to start very small and end very big is generally how I write, kind of like Fellowship of the Ring. And I've made this correlation in the past where, the very beginning of that book, it was super scary for them even to be like 10 miles out of the Shire, right? And it was very small and very scary. By the end, they were, it was obviously destroying the ring. So as part of that, I like to keep the mystery there fully and let it develop fully within the story itself. So I don't collaborate on the campaign per se, but I do fit the characters and players' backgrounds into that story, if that makes sense.
So you weave it into the story.
I do, yes, because I want them to be invested too. But I don't want them. It's kind of like no spoilers, no movie reviews before. It's like I want them to be, like completely surprised and completely exploratory without having any preconceived notions of what the story is about.
Right. And what are your thoughts, Jason?
I'm a mix on all of that. I think my key advice I would give to a newer DM, GM, or storyteller is maybe work with your players about a campaign and theme. You don't have to work the detail, but maybe allow the table an opportunity to develop their own concession of ideas. And that'll immediately pull the table together faster than the kind of typical waiting till the 10th session to determine if the table's vibing and gelling, because that's all part of the beginner experience. Like I'm always trying to practice an empathy skill of what it must really be like to, be working on your confidence, your skill set, your adaptive set, stepping into a role that's a leadership role. That's one of the challenges I think that GMs, DMs, and storytellers have. Gelling like a felon. It is a leadership role, but it's not a God role. And I really don't care for all these, white wizard, bearded DM people trying to tell new people how to be. You can't tell people anything. It's not how the world works. It just isn't how the world works. What they need is guidance and advice and helpful hints and understanding that a leadership role doesn't mean you own the table, So I've been experimenting with the idea with Bear's group, where we've been meeting on Sundays and through Discord to talk about what the theme of the next campaign is going to be. So thematically there's concession, but that doesn't necessarily mean, guidance is a cantrip. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have spoilers, but in an open world environment where the table automatically enjoys a particular theme in mind, that's a great starting position, I think, for both new and matured GMs and DMs, because it takes a lot of the guesswork out and you can be a little bit more focused in the direction of the open world that you want to develop. But for the most part, I live in two worlds. I have my private tables, or technically my non-pay-to-play tables, which are Monday and Tuesday night. And then I have my other 8 pay-to-play tables. So my 8 pay-to-play tables, I feel more like an entertainer, right? I want people to feel entertained, fulfilled, have a wonderful immersive experience, and I get to test all the very edges of my skills to kind of bring that to fruition, while still being relatively true to like the mechanic of the game, and enjoying the game from a mechanical perspective. But also, because I homebrew everything, it allows the players to read a lot of lore in the community without spoiling anything they may find themselves in. And I tap into common lore to, pull them in and tie them in as well. So like all the challenges for either a new or continuing DMGM is, how do we make it fun for ourselves while not kind of forcing the fun out of the player experience, right?
Yeah.
That kind of behavior of, this is my table, you'll do what I say. It's like, it doesn't work at work. It's not going to work at a hobby. So just don't worry about that angst. Get to know your table, get to know the players, become a cohesive group, and just kind of go from there from a standpoint of, because one of the things I did really well with Bear that I absolutely loved, and only about a handful of the players did this throughout all the different tables, they felt comfortable reaching out to me to offer details that they wanted to include in their process. So a lot of Mira's stuff's creativity came from Bear personally, and it was amazing. And I wish all my players would do that, because I think it really helps pull the players, kind of deeper into the immersive experience of the game, which takes a lot of stress off the DM or GM, and just kind of alleviates some of those concerns right out the gate. So
yeah,
it's a tough one, right? Because you still want to be creative, you still want to create a mysterious game, but you don't want to create a mystery that they all hate.
yeah.
Yeah, I will amend that and say that I am fully open to player feedback during the game, whether that is, hey, I've got some ideas about my character, or hey, here are some.
But I'll say, as a newer DM and GM, I think that's critical. I think that will help the entire table. It'll help the campaign last longer. Well, that's a good question. Framework. What does framework look like? Anybody want to tackle that?
So again, for me,
you guys are the DMs. Hello.
So again, for me, a framework is here's a little bit of inspiration, and here's the feel that I want. Okay, here are the first 6 to 10 sessions written out. Okay, here's an idea of what I want to happen at the end, and then in the middle is important locations, important NPCs, important plot points.
So like the bullet points, essentially, for your story.
Right. So like fragments, if you will. Yeah. And I can use those fragments to build the story as we go. That's a framework for me.
Yeah. So you need to allow that gap in between the bullet points to allow creativity to flow between like the players and the GM.
Absolutely. And if the players make the decision through role playing or whatnot to head in a direction that I didn't think of, then of course I'm gonna roll with that, because those are their decisions and that is what's going to keep them invested. And like I said, I've had some really wonderful, discoveries through that exploration that's kept me invested too. So,
yeah. So, from what I'm understanding, is that like when you first start to create a campaign and introduce it to players, there has to be somewhat of a railroad aspect to it at first because you're introducing the world to the players and allowing to give that structure of what your story is and what the environment is like. So for creating a story and introducing it to people, is it better for first time GMs to do it with friends, or is it better with like strangers?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is a tough one. I thought you were going to say, is it better for first-time GMs to do homebrew versus published? And I would definitely say published,
Yeah.
because all that, that heavy lifting is done for you. In terms of friends versus new, I don't know. To be
Yeah.
perfectly, I guess it
I have a
depends.
preference, but I don't know if it's the right answer. Is my challenge.
Well, I think it's preference. That's all that it is. It's not really about like there's a hardcore concept of you wanting to play with just friends only, or
Again,
just.
if I put myself in the shoes of a new DM,
Mhm.
'cause I have I don't really have a preference. I know Jason's preference, but if we put ourselves in the shoes of a new DM, I really think it comes down to if I think it comes down to how comfortable you are
Mm,
being the storyteller and being on the spot,
yeah.
and your relationship. That would apply to how you deal with strangers,
Mm,
and then what kind of relationship you have with your friends. Because
right.
sometimes the better you know people, it's actually harder to tell them to storytell, in a way.
Yeah, I'd agree with 3 Mile.
Yeah, that too.
If I try to slip on a brand new DM pair of shoes, right? If I try to put on those new shoes and say to myself, okay, I've got a bunch of friends that keep bugging me about running a D&D game for them, right?
Mhm.
So that's usually how that gets snowballed, right?
Yeah.
And then the next thing that happens for the next 6 months is no one's available. And, the prospective DM gets kind of frustrated, and starts slipping into bad habits. Becoming
Right.
a martyr DM, becoming kind of antagonistic towards the players because the players aren't being respectful of the available time. And then you immediately create the toxic situation. And that new DM will always say, I had a horrible experience trying to get started. I'm not going to do it. Right.
So
Sorry, Bear, real quick. As a new DM, strangers. That would be my preference. If I were to put those new shoes on, new DM GM shoes, I still think I prefer strangers. I don't know why. I don't know if I'm biased because of the way I've been developing my pro skills over the last 3 years, but I don't know. Like me and Bear were complete strangers when we started, and now we have this wonderful, relationship out of it. I don't know if that works for first time DMs with
it's a
friends
curse.
and family. It could be a curse. Go ahead, finish your thought, Bear. Sorry.
So now that I'm curious, actually, because now that you mention about, players not respecting it's not just the players, it's life in general that doesn't respect the schedules of a D&D campaign. I'm curious, like, depending on your storytelling style, would there be a way to short form campaigns to where, like, maybe it's like an episodic type of campaign?
Yeah, it's a good point because we've been talking about that lately. I'm starting to shift more towards anthology development, short 10-session experiences, and I think as a first-time DM or GM, I think that would be a great way. One shots, 5-parters,
Short stories.
Yeah, don't get yourself so overwhelmed with building this gigantic world with thousands of hours worth of potential session time. You may burn yourself out sooner than you intend to. Do that privately as a way to experience the fun aspect of the game. But if you're fortunate enough to have a regular table where people are respecting the time slot, showing up, having fun, and enjoying the time as a group, don't overwhelm everything with like these huge campaigns.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea for newer GMs and DMs. Start small, think small, and work towards getting bigger.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts, Brian?
I would pretty much agree with that completely. I think I love this anthology idea because that's also kind of how I think with these grand ideas, but then they start small.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know. I still think. I mean, obviously, if we're referring to D&D and referring to levels, I think it's you can make the argument that levels 3 through like 7 or maybe 8 are the most fun in the game. So at least for me, because you're still discovering things about your character. You're not. So I find that I have less fun playing high level characters than I do mid to low level characters. Well, I should say nobody likes playing low level characters. That sucks.
I would really love to do a
mid-level.
future show about how you could take levels out of the game.
I was just about to ask.
Yeah.
So
go
anyway,
ahead, Brian.
just to finish up real quick though, I love the idea of either the anthology or a bunch of short stories or one shots or 3 shots,
Or to
especially for a new DM.
And I just thought of this too, Brian. What about one shots with time dilation? So like you do a one shot and then the group meets again, but their characters have had a 2 or 3 year time in the world.
If that's what the players want to do, I think that's a great idea.
I think that takes a lot of the creativity, like a lot of the over preparedness out of the narrative. Sometimes I think there's a fear of being both over prepared and under prepared sometimes when it comes to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what psychs people out of wanting to do homebrew too, is because there's so many moving components in creating a campaign from the ground up. So I was thinking that like short form, like stories, especially ones that maybe don't even introduce the aspect of leveling as maybe just a completely narrative like adventure, I think would be a very easy and straightforward concept for new DMs to try.
I still love the idea, and I'm still, when I can slot it in time wise, I'm still working on. I'm still interested in working on a full rules system, and I've also talked about this a little bit in the past. And actually making it much more granular, and therefore allow for a lot more character growth without having to worry about levels. I do actually like the idea of taking levels out of the game and just focusing on skill trees and abilities and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Jason will disagree with me, but I think that the D&D mechanics are too dependent on levels, so it's hard to take levels out of D&D completely. But
as a newer DM or GM, I would definitely agree with you. But I think as you hone your skills, and if you're fortunate enough to have a regular group of people that want to play a lot, and they trust you and they trust each other to give it a try, it actually is a lot easier than most people think. It really is. Because
it depends on how you approach it. Yeah, it could be. Like I haven't used experience points in decades.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Milestone is very popular. And had I been a newer DM or GM, I would have been on Milestone right from the very beginning. Had I known that was an option as a brand
really,
new
Milestones, if you're using Milestone, a level is just a label to say here's how much abilities you have garnered. I mean,
but to the point of a newer DM or GM, and let's be clear, the social space and the game playing space is just rife with conversation about the GM DM shortage, right? There's some places you can go to, but they're rare, and you could have 9-10 available GMs or DMs, right? But for the most part, the reason why online play has exploded is because there's more availability of DMs and GMs within the virtual tabletop space. Plus, I think a newer DM or GM getting involved for the first time feels a little bit safer in that environment. There's not that huge amount of pressure, because there's space between you and the players, and the effort, I hate to say it, the effort to walk from your kitchen to your computer is far more forgiving than getting in your car and driving over to a friend's house or a stranger's house or to meet up at a brewery.
Oh my
or a
God. When I
club,
ran that
you know.
bachelor party for Andrew, I schlepped 90 pounds of shit.
Yeah,
Let-
hard.
George.
Yeah, it's hard.
Up his stairs. Plus, you're right. It is easier to, it takes too long to pack up all your stuff and run out of a physical space in tears.
Yeah.
And online, you could
yeah.
just say, "Oh, bzz, I'm done."
Yeah. Oh my what? It's got me.
Yeah. Instead of, "Oh, fuck you, I'm taking my ball and going home."
going
and then you
home.
spend 20 minutes packing up your crap.
But yeah, as a newer DM or GM, getting into the very first time, there are a couple things that D&D Beyond and some of the starter box sets get right. Circle back just for a quick moment. A framework to me is a label, and then that label should be defined by what you build, right?
Mhm.
So my framework is called dynamic. So I use a dynamic framework to build campaigns. Nothing static. All the pieces are moving, whether you interact with them or not.
Mhm.
And every dynamic activity turns into opportunity. So for me, that's the way I kind of categorize frameworks. But to an earlier point, starter box sets. I mean, I just picked up the Shadowrun starter set for the 6th edition Shadowrun through Catalyst. And I'm enjoying the read, but once again, I struggle with the understanding of the value of the skill system, and I want to challenge myself. So I want to, kind of go through what they're doing, right?
Mhm.
And I think for a newer GM or DM, I wouldn't go the VTT route right out the gate. I will always
Okay.
advise every beginner GM DM, regardless of experience in the culture space of your whether you're doing movies, books, anime, or whatever your culture space is that you consume, do theater of the mind. Always start with theater of the mind. It's more forgiving, it's more entertaining, it's more immersive, it's more challenging. It'll bring you up to speed a lot faster than reading word for word out of a book. It will
Yeah.
absolutely bring you up to speed a lot more from a creative standpoint. And you'll begin to realize when you're staring at the table and you've got 6 people staring at you with this intensity, and you're like, oh shit, I'm using theater of the mind, and they're all in. Then the confidence flame goes on, right? You get that little feeling in your chest, that flutter of confidence, and then you never go back. For me, that was me at 11 years old. At 11 years old, I had about between 18 and 22-year-olds around my table. I had finally got out of campaign set or out of modules, and I was experimenting with a homebrew for the very first time, the Moonshay Isles, and they were enraptured.
Wait,
And
did you have people who were 18 to 22 years old, or did you have 18 to 22-year-olds?
Was there 22 2-year-olds?
I had a table.
DMing 2-year-olds, that's got to be challenging.
No, I
A
had a
room full.
table.
Wow.
I had a table of people that were on average, anywhere from 6 to 10 years older than me, that I was DMing for, and it was an experience. It opened my eyes to a lot of things related to confidence, and the thing that all new DMs and GMs, I think, fundamentally seek is that confidence. Like, they want to get to that point of confidence, and therefore, they bloom to a certain extent.
What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
What was the question?
Well, I'm curious because I sort of feel like I want to go with like a homebrew route, but definitely not as complicated as 5e, because I want it to be more story driven and based on the player themselves and the choices that they make.
So my advice for that is, there's different, people approach homebrew differently. Some people, like Brian Gomez, are world builders and they build everything. You can take like I say, mine is homebrew, but it's based in Faerun, and I'm using Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate and all that shit, and part of the map. You can take bits and pieces of whatever you want from anywhere. The story can be yours. You can change the lore. You can change, the deities. You can change the religion system. You can change all of that stuff. But at least, it could be as simple as, okay, I'm just going to use this city because I like the map and it's already done for me, and that can apply to any part of the game. So I don't necessarily think that you need to be afraid of homebrew. It's how you approach homebrew, okay? And you can pick and choose, like found art, pick what you want and mash it all together. Because especially for new DMs, if you do set your goals too high, your expectations too high when it comes to content creation, you may just burn yourself out because you feel like I'm in over my head. So
I would say a happy blend of pre-generated lore and your idea of how you want to change it, and run with that.
Like use published for all the menial work, but let the story be yours.
What are your thoughts on that, Bear, about what 3 Miles just put in there? I think that's an interesting question for a prospective new DM.
How to build an encounter?
Yeah. Well, I mean, from the intimidation aspect, right? Because the second half of this question is encounter building, or a statement to this question. Encounter building is an intimidating part of being a new DM. I would agree with that.
Like, for me right now, I'm already having the concept of, like, giving the characters a choice. And because, like, I'm basically starting at, like, the ground level, like, GMing and doing narrative style, because I want to make sure that I'm not overcomplicating myself with, like, let's put stats, let's put this, let's put that. I just want to know how to storytell first.
Yeah.
Before I start game mastering. So I think when I do start to GM, it will be pretty simple, but I think the encounters will be presented as a choice A or choice B in this matter. But with the focus on immersion.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point that's really in conflict out in the GM space right now. The older generational DMs from, I would say, from tail end of X-Gen all the way out, generational players, right? DMs and GMs, which originally we were called referees back in the early 70s from a perspective of the core rule set. But I think one of the strange conversations going out there, and I'm glad you focused on it, is that a lot of the older generational DMs, GMs don't view us as storytellers, because they view storytellers as an absolute outcome. They assume that a storyteller has it all done in their mind, and therefore a storyteller is doing nothing more than enjoying the situation for themselves and not really allowing the organic nature of the game. Well, I disagree with that. I like DM's Lair, Roll for Combat, a lot of those groups. I'm sorry, I just don't, Professor DM and all those folks that, feel that storytelling is a wrong moniker. And I'm like, well, depends on your interpretation of storytelling. I think me and Bear have the same interpretation. We have this immersive idea in our head, and we know we're the narrator, and we know we feel like storytellers, but I don't believe in absolutes. I will never take away license. I will never force people to do things they don't want to do. And I will never be that kind of, DM, GM, or storyteller. I go for the immersion. That's all that's where my love and my muse is to create that immersion and then watch the players do what they do. So I'd agree with you, Bear.
I want to add one thing. Earlier, you started to ask about railroading, or it was like railroading at the front of it.
To introduce it.
Yeah, I don't really like that term, because to me that denotes, what Jason said about, this is my table, this is my way. Here's what you're gonna. This is my story. Here's what you're gonna do.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's very tropey.
It is, and there are ways to achieve it and stay true to your overall story idea or your plot idea without it being obvious to the players. There are very subtle ways that you can do that. The best tool in role-playing games to do that is NPCs. You could drop subtle hints. You could introduce.
That I like. That's a really good way of stating it.
Yeah,
that's defining exactly what you just detailed out, Brian. Like to a framework has rails. But it doesn't require me to railroad people to stay in the framework. You know what I mean? So I think that simple statement and your definition meet. Like they match. That's exactly
like railroading says you're going to go down this path, period.
Right.
Yeah.
Having rails means, we may take this side spur and go over here and then connect back up with the main line, later on. Or we may stop in this town and then connect back up with the main line. So there are there are ways to keep on the rails or get back on the rails in subtle ways through role-playing, through NPC and character interactions, where it's not like, it's not so in your face, like, the town's guards, throw you in jail, and in order to get out, you need to go on this quest. I mean, everybody can see through that.
But
through that.
At that same theme, right? You could have the players not know each other, suddenly end up in jail, and they have to figure a way out.
Well, of course, but you see what I'm saying. It's
that's
like
a
that
rail,
old,
but not necessarily a railroad.
It's that old adage with managers of make them think that it was their idea and you're golden. Right?
Well, yeah, because like I was initially thinking that railroading would be used as a tool to introduce the setting of your campaign and the tone of it. Like, okay, this is how it's going to start. I need you guys to understand the concept, and then it will open up to the players.
Yeah, and part of the way that you can also do that is by being, and this goes back to doing something that interests you too, is being as descriptive and immersive as possible. One thing that I've found that has even helped me over the past few years, and this is very catch-22, but because everybody wants to be Matt Mercer, and there is only one Matt Mercer, okay?
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful, especially new DMs, talk about setting high expectations in watching somebody like Matt Mercer run games and trying to recreate what he's doing. You're not going to do it. What you can do, because, I mean, everybody agrees he is just an unbelievable DM, okay? He is just fucking fantastic. There's no argument about that. What you can do is watch him and emulate what he does in terms of not how he puts together an entire world, but watch and listen how he does descriptions in new locations. Watch how he introduces NPCs. Watch how he, allows the characters to make their choices within his framework. So it's little cues like that you can emulate and improve your skills, as long as you know that you are not going to be Matt Mercer in 3 months. Okay.
And
what do you mean? I bought the program.
I put the tapes on at night when I'm sleeping. Here's
Please buy my product.
And here's a very, very...
There's that 800 number, like, late at night.
Here's a very, very kind of... and I know Carrie put in a big post in there as well.
Hi, Carrie!
Love to see DMs do more 1 to 3 shots to give people...
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier with anthologies and shorter series and stuff like that. I'm starting to lean more that way, mostly because I want players to be able to feel like they can play more characters more often, discover more themes more often. I think that is, but I hate to burst everyone's bubble. I don't actually like either Brennan or Matt's style.
Yes.
Brennan is way too exposition for me. If you sit and watch his sessions, he talks about 80% of the time, and I'm just not comfortable with that style. It's not how I like to see a table kind of like come together. The thing that Matt doesn't do enough of is remind people who watch him that the reality is he's got a very unique player group. The players in his group are 99% of his game. Now, as a publisher and author, I do like the way he writes. I don't necessarily agree with all the stylistic ways that he runs the table, but I love the way he writes. I do love the way he publishes, the way he writes, and the way he creates his creative framework, because it reminds me of how I enjoy writing, but I don't spend enough time on it to be as practiced as he is. And I don't have a publisher, and I don't have a copywriter. I don't have someone to check my work, right? At best, I can say, hey, Callista, can you read this and see if this is okay? And she loves me. It's going to be shit. She'll go, oh yeah, it's perfect. You're fine. Right. So I like his writing style, but I definitely run the table more towards the player narrative. And therefore I'm a much more forgiving DM/GM than I think than either Brennan or Matt is. They are Brennan's very unforgiving. He's a horror show. That guy, he loves to torture his players, but they know that when they sit at the table, and that's why that consent of that behavior works well for those groups. Matt loves the way all of his players are narrative driven, and that's why I think when Daggerheart comes out, they're going to finally codify that method, and we're going to finally get that narrative driven system, right? But to your earlier point, Bri, I would absolutely agree. Drunks and Dragons, Grouch Couch, Dungeon Run, Dimension 20.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be Matt Mercer. Pick someone you like.
Watch all of them, because find the ones that kind of help you. Oh, this now I understand how the mechanics work because I'm watching. In fact, just pick one for the purposes of the encounter. Just watch an encounter for 2 hours, and almost 90% of the angst of an encounter will go away because they've been playing for over 15 years and they still fuck it up.
Yeah.
It's still going to happen. It's still going to happen for sure. Don't bother planning encounters. It's a waste of time. Doesn't work. As a newer DM or GM, just let the encounters happen. Let the chaos of the dice happen. Let all the mistakes happen right away, and let those mistakes guide you immediately in your next sessions as you move forward. As you become a more seasoned DM or GM, then you can kind of practice the idea of thinking that encounters are going to be more specifically manageable and organized and creative. My dirty little secret is I have never written a single encounter in the last 30 years. I don't write encounters. They just happen. And I have content ready to go to support any possible encounter that happens. That's the way my framework works.
I disagree with you a little bit on that. Again, you are at the far end of the extreme in terms of free flow play in all its forms. Okay.
Agreed.
I would agree. Now, again, in my bag of assets, I have encounters written, of course. Okay.
Sharon, nothing. You're not gonna touch that one. He said bag and ass in the same sentence. No, nothing.
Asset.
I say leakage. I say one word leakage, and she's all over me.
That was before the show. No, I do write encounters. There are encounters that I want in my story, again, to support the story, to support the mood, to support the feel, and I will write those.
Exhausting.
Well, but again, it's not like, okay, during this session, 20 minutes in, they're going to do this encounter. That, I agree, will be incredibly frustrating. So write it more.
That sounds...
Well, that's what a lot of DMs feel encounters are. It's like, okay, during this time, here's where they are. Am I wrong?
Well,
I'm going to throw that one out.
To a certain degree, though, one of the advantages we have as a mature group talking about this It's a different conversation when a bunch of 15-year-olds are talking about
Well,
it.
of course.
13-year-olds are talking about, but yet that's where the seeds are planted.
Yeah.
That's always the hard part. You plant the seeds at those points.
But again, I think part of the angst of the encounter process is,
I can't tell Bear's having camera problems or latency issues.
No, she's there.
Oh, okay. It was all pixelated.
You're there.
Oh,
right?
there she's back. Yeah, she's back.
I think part of the angst is
the Matrix.
I'm going to be spending all this time on this encounter. I think part of the angst is I'm going to be spending all this time on this encounter, and what if they don't end up there, or what if they need this type of thing? And I agree with you in that regard. Don't be dead set on this encounter has to happen at this time in this location. Yada yada yada. Have it in your bag of tricks so that when you can slot it in, you can slot it in. But you do definitely have to. I mean, it's like the few times on Critical Role when when the players make a decision and completely sidestep an encounter, and Matt's like, "Well, that was a whole weekend worth of miniature building down the tube."
And it happens. Like, I mean,
So
Rain Lands bypassed, maybe 20, 30 pages of content that could have become encounters.
I have encounters all the time that I had planned for a session that happened 1, 2, 4 sessions later.
Yeah.
But the way I write them, they can still slot in when needed to support the story. If they don't, then they just go in my archive.
And my proof that encounter building just is very difficult is that if you go to D&D Beyond, they have an encounter building system built in there. Mm-hmm. They built it 2 years ago, and it's still called Alpha.
2 years
they can't
ago?
even get over there first.
Try 2 years ago.
Try 4.
Well, no, it was introduced as Alpha 2 years ago.
Okay.
And they obviously had iterations of it built before then. But yeah, it's stupid. It's like,
Well, I will say this, and I know your hatred for D&D Beyond. For all that aside, if as a DM you choose, I won't make a recommendation that you do, but if you choose to use D&D Beyond just as an organizational tool, I would recommend using the Encounter Builder just from a very granular standpoint, because it is very easy to, within minutes, set up, here's my group of players, and I need this kind of threat, and blah, 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 fill it in, and at least you have it there, and everything is in one place. So from an organizational standpoint, it actually does what it needs to do.
Foundationally,
without getting into a deeper conversation of how it could be better, because yes, it could, but...
Wow. Well, guys, we burned up the
I'm
oil
like, holy
for
shit, it's been an hour?
1 hour.
I got like 20 hours of this shit in my head because I love talking about this.
Let me ask you, Sharon, do you feel like you have... Do you feel like we've provided any value?
I think I'm more concerned now. But we'll see. We'll see how the tables flips.
As the tables turn.
Yes.
Okay.
Who knows? I might introduce you guys to a new concept of storytelling in D&D. Who knows? But I think I'm going to try to go with the homebrew route without, having my brain melt too much. So I'm pretty excited about that,
awesome.
Which will be a brand new experience for y'all. So I hope everyone gets to join in on the fun as well.
Well, if this ends up in you DMing the two of us, like we talked about, kind of like at the end of every session, every episode for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I'm very excited for that, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. But that better happen. But no pressure. When are you going to do that?
Who knows?
All right, rollies?
Yes, let's go.
Sure.
I'm going to use my Sailor Moon dice.
I'm going to use my my Funko Pop dice.
Oh, that's pretty. I like the Sailor Moon colors.
Natural 20.
No way!
I'm sorry. That's a natural 1. My mistake. 20 is the D&D symbol. That's a 1.
I got an 8.
And it's all you, Bear. I got a 4.
Well, everyone, thank you all for joining us for another episode of Lawfully Chaotic Season 2, Episode 14 on how to be a GM. You can catch us over here on the Twitch channels and the YouTube channels on Lawfully Chaotic and the TTRPG channels. And also later in the future, you may find me somewhere up in the interwebs. Feel free to check me out over at BerryBot for more information on that. And Brian, where can we find you?
You can find me at RPG&Co on most channels. Otherwise, it is Play RPG&Co, which is my website. But Instagram is generally the best place to get a hold of me, and that is RPG&Co.
And Jason, where can we find you?
Super easy. Head on over to TTRPG Academy, hit About Us. All of our links are there, Discord, Instagram, and YouTubes, and all the fun things you can track us down with. And that's where you can find me.
And thank you all for joining us for another episode. And remember, TPK, tell a story.
Play a game.
Be kind.
We'll see
Good
you all
night,
next
everybody.
week.
Good night, all.